What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had the DNA of every member of the Akatsuki, or what if Naruto was neglected and joined the Straw Hat Pirates, go check out my main channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Absolutely not. From the Hokage Tower came the loud and defiant cry. The citizens looked up in alarm before shaking their head with exasperation. Honestly, that had been going on for the last 5 or 6 days now, and while the average populace did express concern over the identity of their next Hokage after Sandaime declared himself unfit for further command of the office, they would prefer if the major decisions are carried out of earshot and do not intervene with their daily business. Hearing such ear-splitting denial on such daily basis grated on the nerve of the most amicable of people. "Look, you old coot," Jiraiya snarled into the face of the still smiling Hokage, whose grin had taken on a Cheshire cat-like appearance, and quite frankly such knowing and superior smirk irritated the toad hermit more than anything else. Honestly, how many times must he refuse the goddamned position before the codger would take an effing hint and drop the subject? Couldn't he tell that Jiraiya was not and never will be interested in this seemingly honorable and glorious but really boring as hell position? There's absolutely no way I will accept, no way in heaven or earth was he going to be fooled by the glamour that his old sensei tried to present his seat with. He had heard one too many times the wizened old shinobi groan on and on about how woeful his days had been trapped amongst the paperwork and the complaints of the most menial in nature, or how utterly regretful he had been that he had been so close to the second Hokage. As far as Jiraiya was concerned, if the job doesn't land you a hot chick or two, then it's better off not filled, at least by him, and to add insult to injury, the pay wasn't all that attractive either. Seriously, he can make more by writing a volume of that infamously perverse book of his. Thus the Toad Sannin was perfectly contented with his present conditions. The pay's excellent, the job's unstressful, and you'd be surprised how many women falls for the title of one of the Sannin. And he was not about to give all that up for one stuffy office and an even stuffier attire. Why are you even thinking about retiring anyway? The man, after 5 straight days of constant refusals, decided to raise the important question. "You don't look like you're 1 foot in the graveyard." Maybe not. The Sandaime sighed as he paused in his calligraphy session, surveying at his handiwork with evident pride. He was quite the master with a calligraphy brush, unlike a certain white-eyed clan head he doesn't care to name, but I do feel weary, especially after he paused at this and finished the last stroke. Putting away the writing utensil, he turned to face his student. "Battling with Orochimaru made me realize something, Jiraiya. I'm not as strong as I once was. No matter how hard I attempt to deny this fact, the strength I once wielded in my prime is slipping fast from my grasp. I'm not growing any younger or any stronger. First it's Orochimaru I could not defeat, but soon there will be Jonins to follow, and before you know it I would be nothing more than a defenseless old man who requires a walking stick just to get to the other side of the road. I am tired, Jiraiya. I'm not fit to lead anymore. The future must be entrusted to another in whom the spirit of fire burns still blindingly." Jiraiya's face grew solemn. He had rarely glanced at such weakness in his mentor before. The old time the kindly old man had displayed such crushing despair had been when Orochimaru first defected from Leaf and Sarutobi had failed to land the killing blow. He had blamed himself for Orochimaru's failing. Jiraiya was certain of that, just as his recently made decision had been influenced by the traitor's death in some way. Deep down inside, Sandaime Hokage had always considered Orochimaru to be a son, a prodigal and wayward son, but a son nonetheless. Yet the recent events have made the aging ruler realize that the rift between them would never mend, and Orochimaru would never find redemption, especially after Naruto had been through with him. The Snake Master's death had been hard on Jiraiya. Also, try as he might to deny this, he had cared for the betrayer like a brother once, and even after his exile the Toad Sage had never given up hope that somehow Sannin no Orochimaru could and would be converted to the side of Konohagakure once more. He had sought after the traitor ceaselessly through the years, always clinging on the shred of foolish dream, but unlike the Sandaime, Jiraiya had a better grasp on his grief. Well, why not choose Naruto then? He demanded, suddenly struck by inspiration. The only thing now that he thought about it Naruto lacked for the office was age, a limitation easily revoked if enough council members were to come into agreement. The boy was powerful beyond comprehension, beyond even a Kage's level. He was a brilliant strategist, rivaling Shikamaru in intelligence without the unsightly laziness, but most importantly the war also allowed for an opportunity to remove the more stubborn and conservative elders from their seat of power by pure chance, of course. Besides, by now the word of the Uzumaki had spread far and wide, and no nation in this plane of existence would possibly hope to challenge a hidden village whose Hokage could command the power of a dragon, or one who could match a Biju in raw power, of course, since the majority of the world was convinced that Naruto was some kind of demonic-like entity with fangs and claws and wings, it would prove rather difficult to convince them that the one they had all but deified was in fact a child not old enough to shave. Especially now, charters of the official Naruto fan club had been set up all over the elemental countries, and whose members are legions. Jiraiya would have been disturbed if he hadn't found the whole thing so profitable. You simply wouldn't believe the astronomical price Naruto's used boxers could fetch. He was sufficiently unnerved when the buyer turned out to be male, because the Hokage shrugged his shoulder and informed his pupil matter-of-factly, "Naruto could beat me to within an inch of my life." "You can't." "How is she?" Haku asked as she hovered over the sick bed where the medical nin worked laboriously. In the aftermath of the war, it was discovered the sacrifices used to bring back the previous Hokages had been alive, if barely. They were transferred to the hospital almost immediately. It was proposed that they, having association to Orochimaru, would yield valuable information regarding the village of Sound. Unfortunately, despite the long hours the staff had put in, the two of the Otonins are still in critical condition, with the boy Zaku hanging by a thread. But Haku was interested in them for an entirely different reason. The two unconscious shinobis are so much like her. At one time, all of them nothing but tools to serve a master to whom they devoted everything. They had pledged their loyalty, their life, and even their hearts and soul to their masters, and yet they ended up so very differently. Haku was fortunate that not only did his master care for her in his own aloof way, but she had also found comfort in Naruto. She could have just as easily ended up like these two before her, used and cast aside to die without mercy. It frightened her. Her conditions are stabilizing, Miss, the medical nin answered respectfully. If only for her relation to the great Naruto-sama. The use of it annoyed the gentle girl. She had considered it her private term, but she couldn't do much to stop it from catching on. But I don't know how long she will be before she wakes up from this coma. I see. Haku sighed and brushed a strand of silky black hair from her porcelain face. What's going to happen to her? She shuddered to think about the fate that awaited a prisoner, especially a prisoner of war. There's no such thing as rules of engagement for shinobis. Rape and beating are the least of a prisoner's worries. Once committed, it pained her to see this girl, 13, at the most, waste away in some dark and gloomy corner of a forgotten chamber. The girl wasn't exactly beautiful. She was cute in an insolent sort of way, the kind that stands out in a crowd. But Haku knew it would only be a matter of time before the defiance and independence was stripped from her, leaving her a hollow and empty shell of a person. Happened to her? The other shinobi raised an eyebrow. Well, I imagine imprisonment, if she's lucky. That is, Leaf doesn't take kindly to invaders, miss. As she thought, the ice user allowed herself another sigh as she brushed against the soft cheeks of a slumbering kin. She looked so peaceful in her dreams, unaware of the horrors that lurked just outside of that fantasy realm. She was jolted out of her musings when the features grimaced slightly and a soft moan escaped from the sound nin's lips. Slowly, dark eyes opened and began to study her surrounding with a bleary clarity. A second later, the same eyes widened in shock and fear as realization sank in. The girl tried frantically to struggle and to flee, only to fall right back onto her pillows, panting with exhaustion and agony. It's no use, Haku informed her from beside the sick bed. We managed to save you from the ritual, but the transformation had left you with a severe chakra depletion and a seriously damaged body. We were able to patch things up as well as we could, but it will be a couple of days before you could even think about moving. The girl said nothing, only whimpered in her covers, seemingly resigned to her fate. She held no illusion about what fate awaited her once she recovers. She had seen all too much on the occasional journey into Orochimaru's dungeons, where he housed those who failed him. Such especially hold true for her. The interrogators take far more pleasure and time in breaking a woman. Haku bit her lips. It wasn't the girl's fault, really. She was only a tool after all. She only did what she had been told to do before being cruelly betrayed by the man she had called master. She didn't deserve this kind of life, just as you wouldn't blame the kunai for a death. Why take one's rage out on a shinobi merely following orders? But she knew the people of Konoha wouldn't see it this way. Wait, at last her sympathy got the better of her. She could only hope to the gods Naruto wouldn't be angry with her decision. Once she recovers, release her into my custody. I will assume for responsibility over her after her recovery. Missed the medical nin's eyebrows shot straight up in utter surprise. He was not prepared for this at all. I am afraid I can't do that. It's against the regulation. And Haku waved away the protest. I will be more than willing to shoulder full responsibility for my action, but in the meantime I expect full compliance for my request. But the council, the man was still protesting weakly, though even he knew it was a losing argument. As one of the few who knew, Haku, the girl, had worked as a volunteer in the hospital before he was aware of her relation with the savior of the village. He was also aware that it's more likely than not Naruto would agree to this proposal of hers, and since it's already common knowledge that Naruto has the newly elected elders, who made up of over 60% the council eating out of his hand, it seemed pretty clear just what would be the result of this infringement of the rules. I will speak to the council and to Naruto-sama. Haku looked a little crossed at being questioned so many times. Do not worry about it, I very well missed the medical. Nin could not help but given he knew when he was fighting for a lost cause somewhere in Konoha. Naruto felt a chill running up his spine as though his destiny has taken yet another dramatic turn with many unforeseen complications, but the flaxen-haired youth shrugged the feeling off. He was probably been a little paranoid. Danzo was a desperate man. How could it be that in only so short a time he would be jousted from his seat of power and his reign of the council broken beyond saving? How could it be that the secret network he had worked so hard to build, the loyal elders he so strived to bind, would in but a few days uprooted and exterminated without a trace? Officially the elders, the ones that had taken his side and swore allegiance to his cause, had died during the invasion. Heroes who had stood up to the enemy shinobis unafraid and undaunted, but it was all a sinister lie spun by the Hokage of this. Danzo was sure most of the elders were civilians. They had no right to even be outside during a battle of such scale and intensity. Besides, was it not in the least suspicious that of the minuscule non-combatant casualties, which amounted to less than 100, over a dozen council members happened to be among them? It seemed a little far-fetched even for a shinobi-operated settlement. Furthermore, the identities of the elders, in particular the civilian elders, was a matter of the highest secrecy, undisclosed even to their own families. It was one of the few S-ranked secrets Konoha held and available only to the Fire Shadow and the members themselves. It was doubtful that the village of Hidden Sound could procure this kind of information and thusly devise a plan of assassination, but Danzo would rather be damned before he was convinced that the whole thing was simply a coincidence. Either it smelt of treachery, and given what he knew, it was clear to the ambitious man only one person was capable of irrigation of power with such speed: the commander of the ANBU himself, the Lord Hokage. It was a bloodless and quite revolution, one that brought the third into the full reign of power. The newly selected elders were his loyal supporters, most of them several generations after the third, men and women who had grew up with tales of the professor's legendary exploits, and they were also loyal to the fourth as well, who trusted his predecessor with his own life. They would back the third in whatever action he takes, all in the name of the glorification of the village. However, Danzo was not so easily defeated, as his old rival would soon discover there were other cards to be played and other games to be had. The old coot might have won this round, but the battle was not yet over and the war has barely begun. With a cold smile, the disgraced elder waved his hand to the darkness, summoning the silent form of an ANBU root to his side. Go tell the Kazama clan I am willing to listen to their terms. Rise and shine, Sleeping Beauty. Tayuya heard the voice growl above her as she opened one eye tentatively. She knew where she was, of course, having woken up several hours before as one of Orochimaru's closest servants. She was no stranger to pain and had developed a high tolerance thereof, so in spite of her grievous injuries, several broken bones, and some damaged organs, she was able to stir herself from her agony-induced coma. Earlier than anyone had anticipated, she was somewhat surprised that the people of Konoha had taken the time and effort to attend to her injuries, though the ninjas of Hidden Sound would not have been nearly as merciful by comparison. Looking around, she managed to make out the form of her comrades, all of whom seemed to share her predicament, bounded and strapped to metallic chairs, interrogation chairs. Really, now did she expect anything else, having been captured by the very people she had attempted to invade? An interrogation seemed almost humane by contrast if positions were reversed and she herself had been the questioner. The redhead had no illusions as to the torture she would have subjected her victims to just for the sheer heck of it. Well, the voice continued as Tayuya felt the presence linger behind her, fixing his or her attention upon the captured shinobi. Try as she might to strain her neck, the girl could not identify the speaker, who remained hovering just out of her sight. So you've come around at last. I was wondering when you might decide to join us, the flute user sneered before launching into a string of colorful and quite imaginative curses, many of which even her questioner seemed to be impressed by, having made a note to himself to jot them down. However, on the surface, all the vehement swearing did was elicit an amused chuckle from the man who waited patiently for the Odo elite to finish, and finish she did, having exhausted her vocabulary and her saliva supply. The girl fell back onto her chairs again, panting with exhaustion. She was reminded rather painfully that her wounds had just begun to heal. What a sharp tongue our princess has got again. The man laughed. His soft snickers echoed ominously in the dimly lit chamber. Tayuya flinched and braced herself from what she knew of the interrogators. They did not appreciate any form of insolence from their prey and would break them any way they saw fit, including physical violence, but the blow she'd expected never came. As though sense her thoughts, the man grinned and spoke again. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. You look like you're on your deathbed anyway. Besides, I got a daughter about your age, so I'm rather averse to violence. As of now, you're a right fucking model of a torturer. Tayuya snarled in anger, her examiner's friendly air flying over her completely. She didn't understand it at all. Why the hell was the man being so goddamn nice to her? They were freaking enemies, for heaven's sakes. And really, now is this what constitute interrogation? For Konoha nowadays, if that was the case, then the fiery redhead would rather snuff herself than to live with the knowledge that she had lost to such a pack of softies. If this had been one of Orochimaru's men, she'd be dead long before, or wishing she was dead. At any rate, again came the infuriating laughter. Now it's not very nice for a young lady to swear like that. Bite her. Besides, we've gotten everything we needed from your friends, so you're just here for a nice little vacation before we release you. You're releasing me? Tayuya's eyebrow shot up to her forehead. Are you fucking crazy? We are mortal enemies, dumbass. The moment you let us go, we'd slit your throat, and you will be the first. Mark my word. The amusement was all the more pronounced in the interrogator's voice as he replied, well, in a manner of speaking, you will be under supervision from one of our numbers until such times as when the council are satisfied with your good behavior, but you'll be given relative free reign around the village. Besides, I don't see how you are going to be of much problem, seeing as how your leader is sipping tea in the grate beyond. The female member of the Sound Four felt as though she was dumped into ice-cold water, fear crawling up her skin. No, that was impossible. Surely the man was lying. Orochimaru, he's dead. The girl ventured a hesitant question. More than you can imagine. Well, shit. The questioner grinned from in the shadows. Now the girl was ready to talk. Wow, Kin muttered. Wow, Haku, echoed she. Couldn't believe her eyes as the enormous mansion loomed overhead. She knew the village hero worshipped Naruto when his feats became known to the public, but she had no idea the extent of their enthusiasm once words have gotten out that Naruto-sama's apartment building had been burnt to the ground as a result of the invasion. A replacement residence was provided before Haku could even file a damage report. Of course, she had expected a little quaint building where she could spend her free time relaxing with Naruto. She certainly didn't expect a veritable castle. The manor sat at the edge of the village, a silent but beautiful structure constructed in a style that had existed centuries before and somewhat alien compared to the village that it was part of. Waist-high edges surrounded the manor with tall shady trees evenly spaced between the white cobblestone pavement that lead through a perfectly manicured garden, leading to the great double doors of the mansion, on either side of which stood marble statues of angelic maidens, their hands upon small intricately carved instruments. From behind the house was nestled in a sea of greenery ancient trees whose memories recalled a time when Konoha was not yet built and when the entire area had been an endless forest that extended on for miles and miles without end. It was an awe-inspiring sight. Haku remembered that the house had belonged to a rich gentleman who had taken great pride in his possessions and had made certain every meticulous detail of the house had been as polished and new as the day it was built, but the man had passed away without leaving an heir to his name, and so the building remained empty and for sale. Not that anyone had the kind of money the price asked for, but as far as the council in whom rested the final decisions concerning the unused property was concerned, the well-being and providence of the hero and savior Uzumaki Naruto was far more important than any last will made by some nameless old codger. So in order to display their appreciation of his war efforts, the elders in a unanimous vote decided to present the building to the blonde as an act of goodwill. So a few minutes Haku and Kin walked inside, marveling at the extravagant interior of the mansion, larger than either of them had ever expected. It was to the two girls, who had little experiences of luxuries and life, a palace fit for kings. Carefully, almost as though they feared disturbing their majestic surroundings, the girls made their way to the living room where rested the various items the shinobis managed to rescue before Naruto and Haku's old apartment collapsed to rubble. An aging man waited next to the pile, and as the girls approached he flashed them a warm smile. Oh, hello there, you must be Haku-chan. I've heard about you through one of your co-workers. The name is Shinji Sakamoto. I am the caretaker and groundskeeper of this house and had been for over 50 years. Haku looked a little taken aback at the introduction. She wasn't certain how to respond to the kindly old man. Well, I guess it's nice to meet you, sir. The man beamed. Well, then I expected you must be tired after all that traveling, so why don't you head up to your rooms? I hope you don't mind, but I have already prepared 3 bedrooms prior to your arrival. I do hope you will find them satisfactory to your tastes. Everything, mattress, furniture, and the like have been set up, so you won't have to do very much now. As for myself, I'll be around once a week or so to check up on the house, but if you'll need anything, feel free to call me. Haku smiled a little as relief rushed through her. Thank God, the last thing she needed was a stranger poking around her house, even if he was the caretaker of the house. And as the old man walked through the door, the raven-haired Chunin turned to her new acquaintance and smiled at the ex-Otonin warmly. Well, let's get Some Restuf Tenten grunted as she was slammed backward by the force of the blow, her sword cracking under the pressure. Flipping herself to an upright position, she narrowed her eyes and gauged her opponent, a very lax-looking Naruto who seemed to be not even trying, although given the difference in their abilities, Tenten would have been a thoroughly dead kunoichi if Naruto had made an effort. Your movements are good, Naruto informed her encouragingly, as he dropped into another lazy defensive stance. Waiting for the weapon mistress to come at him again. The girl had potential certainly, and with a little fine honing would make for a deadly shinobi. Besides, it wasn't as though he had anything else to do at the moment. Although there is still too much rigidity between your attacks, you're following my instructions far too literally. It is meant to be only a guideline to practice. Mine or any sword style in such verbatim manner would destroy any real power within the form flow in between your steps. Allow your own instinct to control your movements, not your memories. Again, wiping some sweat from her brow, Tenten nodded and charged. Ever since she made Genin, the bun-haired girl was determined to prove herself and the kunoichi population in general as being no inferior to any male shinobi. Unfortunately, while she is certainly determined and presumably talented enough, she lacked a proper sensei for her resolve. To become a reality guy was eccentric and powerful, but he was no weapon user, and neither were most of Konoha's shinobi forces for that matter. So while the girl received excellent instructions and most of the shinobi ways, her youthful teacher did almost nothing to advance her specialty. That was before she met Naruto. Tenten's father had been a kenjutsu master to some degree, but Naruto made him look like a 3-year-old child waving a harmless stick. True, Naruto did prefer to overwhelm his opponent with magic, but from what few times Tenten could glimpse during the invasion, the boy's swordsmanship was not simply good, it was damn nearly perfect. Granted, he practiced a fairly unorthodox style of combat largely due to the size of his blade, but it was deadlier by far than what little teaching the weapon girl had access to. So the brunette approached the blonde for a private lesson, although she didn't put much hope into it. After all, the boy had all but surpassed the rank of Kage, and a Kage, or the Sanins for that matter, do not give out their tutelage to anybody who asked. And while Tenten was confident about her abilities, she was also observant enough to note that they are not enough to attract the attention of someone of such legendary status. So it was that a very surprised Tenten stumbled onto training ground 8, only find Hinata Hyuga, a noted failure of her clan, practicing her family style of gentle fist under Uzumaki. Naruto of all people, though it seemed a little different from the gentle fist style the weapon mistress had seen her teammate perform, it lacked the speed and ferocity of Niji's style, flowing in a much more smooth and gentle manner. Not unlike water, she was so taken with the technique that she had practically blurted out her request. To her great shock, she had expected thorough rejection. The boy cracked what appeared to be a ghost of a smile and told her to report to the same training ground the next day. Several weeks have passed since then, and Tenten was growing by leaps and bounds. She had even managed to fight Niji to a stalemate, though admittedly the latter of the two had held back somewhat, but nonetheless it was still a sure sign of her improvement. Few shinobi of their age could hold their own in a hand-to-hand combat with the wide-eyed genius. After all holding back a curse, Tenten managed to parry a forward thrust of Naruto's sword, only to discover that it was a feint, and before she could react, Naruto had stepped inside her defense. A single punch to her gut quickly floored her, and she could swear she had seen stars at the moment of contact. Not bad, Naruto observed seriously, helping the girl to her feet. We'll try this again next week, Tenten groaned. Jiraiya smiled deviously as he approached the blonde who was sitting in his garden alongside Haku and a rather nervous Kin. The toad hermit had to admit even he was jealous that the brat had received such incredible estate when he, one of the legendary Sanins, lived inside a one-story flat. How very insulting of it all. Hey Naruto-kun, just the person I'd like to see, he called out, forcing his face into the friendliest of expressions he could imagine. In truth, it would have scared little children, witless and eligible females, into a panic. Both female next to Naruto scooted back apprehensively as the sage walked towards them, their hands instinctively within reaching distance of their kunai holsters. Somewhere in the back of their mind a pervert sense tingled. Hello Jiraiya-sama, Naruto greeted the man evenly, his eyes showing no emotion whatsoever. Then again, Naruto is not likely to show any emotion. Even if the four horsemen knocked on his door, he was for once not dressed in his almost trademarked cloak, but in a very relaxed state with a loose white blouse and dark blue trousers. If not for his mask of indifference, he could almost pass for a civilian of sorts. To what do I owe this pleasure? Well, I'm sure you've heard the old man is retiring and is looking for a successor, Jiraiya began, but was interrupted as Naruto spoke, his voice soft but commanding. I assure You just as I've assured the Hokage I do not wish for this position at this time, he informed the Toad Sage coldly. Yeah, I gathered as much, and to tell you the truth I don't much care for the seat myself. Jiraiya shrugged as he leaned against the trunk of a nearby tree. But it's gotta go to someone, right? That is correct. Naruto nodded hesitantly, waiting to see where this conversation is going, which means there has to be another candidate for the position. Jiraiya finished, a mischievous glint in his lecherous eyes, which even now took in every feature of Naruto's female companions. Nice girls, and still virgins too. Naruto really need to learn how to take advantage of the situation, the pervert decided in his mind, and it just so happens I know just one such scapegoat, or I mean candidate. Naruto repressed an overwhelming feeling to blast Jiraiya into Kingdom Come with a firm hand. And who do you propose? Jiraiya-sama, if I might ask. Jiraiya grinned an evil grin. Tell me, have you ever heard of the legendary sucker somewhere in Lightning Country? A certain Tsunade of the Saiyans shivered with growing apprehension. Somewhere in a dark cavern. How very interesting. A cold voice sounded through the darkness, sending shiver down the kneeling man's spine. It would appear destiny proved more elusive than I thought. This news certainly changed matters. One should think. Go, my servant, gather together the nine. It is time for the Akatsuki to emerge from the shadows and claim this world in my name. Pain, leader of the organization known as Akatsuki, brushed his forehead against the cold stone surface of the ground. Though he was the strongest of the nine, his strength did not hold a candle in comparison to his master and lord. As you wish, Akatsuki-sama. When the last lingering traces of the rain missing mean vanished from sight, the voice of Akatsuki sounded penetrated the abyss once more, yet it was a voice filled with compassion and worry, not at all like the cold and malicious tone employed only minutes ago. Child of the planet, I did all I could for you. Hurry, for time grows short. You are the only one who can save us before the shadow of the seraphim consumes us all. Time skip. Kazuma Kawato frowned as he stared at the pile of chips lying before him, his hands trembling with nervousness and apprehension. Perhaps looking around the table at the ring of stony faces, the mid-aged oil tycoon could not help but wonder if he had made a mistake joining this particular game as a man who had dragged himself from the gutters. Kawato always believed in his luck. It had after all carried him through the roughest times of his rise to wealth, when he had allowed his intuition and not judgment to formulate some of the most daring, suicidal and miraculous decisions of his career. And tonight those same instincts lead him to join a poker game aboard the massive luxury ocean liner SS Oceania, where was held one of the largest gambling tournaments of its kind in all of the elemental nations. Everyone who anyone was present upon the cruiser, either lounging on the decks down below enjoying the various allures the ship had to offer, or more likely than not partaking in one of the many gambling events scattered about the enormous vessel. It wasn't just the professionals either that flocked to this event. Casual gamblers, vacationing shinobis, and even simple travelers and tourists too were attracted to the spectacle of it all. Of course, they mostly acted as audiences to the more advanced and heated casino games, preferring to part their money to others just as unskilled, or to the indifferent slot machines strategically placed at convenient locations. Though at this particular moment in time most of the passengers have gathered in one of the largest and the most extravagantly adorned chamber of the liner, where the single most intense and high-staked poker game was taking place. It was, despite the non-violence and the unnerving silence, no less than a veritable war waged between the players who fought their battle in the excess of millions of Rias. Kawato bit his lip as he steeled himself. Then when it came to his turn, he pushed the small mountain of plastic chips to the center of the table. His words, when he did speak, came out in a barely audible "his 27 millions all," and the man declared, ignoring the gasps and whispers that went on amongst the onlookers, this would be the game that decides everything for him. Winning or defeat, everything he has brought with him was riding on this one game. With that thought he glanced around the table at the others, all of whom seemed to be contemplating on their course of actions. To his left sat a white-haired man looking to be in his 80s. Kawato knew the man. Ishikawa Katsuru was an incredibly wealthy businessman famous for his extensive collection in all things rare. His house held, according to rumors, more artifact than any museum in the whole of the elemental countries. Of course, being as it was, it also boasted enough guards to constitute a private army. Katsuru supposedly dabbled in just about everything. Real estates, law firms, and manufacturing were just the tip of the iceberg for the aging aristocrat, and if whispered tales were to be believed, he even had connection to certain missing mean factions. To his right, next to the dealer, was seated an incredibly attractive and voluptuous female with a dress a size or two too small. The revealing cloth clung to her skin and bring to attention her already impressive attributes. Kawato didn't know much about her other than her name, Chinin Midori. As far as anyone could tell, she was simply a professional poker player with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Of course, given the nature of this game, it was unlikely that she was just an average player. Then there was the one who had offered himself as Erasure. He was an enigma, if Kawazo had ever seen one. His entire body, concealed beneath the folds of a black robe, he was the perfect embodiment of the unknown. Yet something was strange about this player, something that screamed danger, something that warned Kawazo to run away at the first chance. Whoever this Erasure may be, there was an air of unearthliness to him, an aura of the supernatural. Judging by the piles of chips in front of him, that supernatural seemed to have extended to his skills as well. Kawazo had never seen anyone play so well before in his life. It was almost as though the man knew exactly what cards he would receive. If Kawazo hadn't known that the dealer had no connection to any of them, he would have thought Erasure to be outright cheating. 30 million all in Chinin. Midori considered her hands for a moment before calling out as well. Ishikawa Katsuru appeared pensive but shrugged his shoulders and tossed his lot in with the two players. 52 million all, and the whispers grew into a crescendo of sounds as the excitement bubbled within the crowd, threatening to erupt at any moment. Over 100 million was at stake here, 100 million with winner taking all. Of course, that was if one did not consider the presence of the stranger Erasure. The ropes shifted and Erasure made his move. 100 million all, and the audience waited with bated breath as the dealer revealed each card to the nervously awaiting assembly. It was as though the card dealer was purposely prolonging the moment of truth. Every player watched the man's hands anxiously. 209 million was an immense sum even for them. Kazuma Kawazo's cards were up first. Ace high flush came the cold reply. The man wrangled his hands agitatedly as he waited for the others. Ishikawa Katsuru came next. Full house. There were some mutters at this, and the old man seemed very pleased with himself. Kawazo's shoulders sagged a bit as he realized he had just walked away from the table with nothing but shame. Katsuru soon shared his pain, however, when Midori's cards turned out to be a straight flush. As far as everyone was concerned, that was pretty much over for Erasure. Unless he could somehow pull out a royal flush, an event about as likely as the urban legend Uzumaki Naruto existing. Midori licked her lips suggestively, causing several members of the audience to develop noticeable nosebleeds. She was all but set for the money, and she knows it too. Until that is the dealer called out the final cards. Royal flush. Mr. Erasure wins. That was incredible. Anko Mitarashi greeted Erasure with a flying tackle as soon as the now 200 million Ryu richer gambler stepped out of the noisy and packed casino. The money, already sealed within a small ninja scroll. I've never seen anyone play like that. Anko from behind the purple-haired Jonin, an equally attractive raven-haired woman, admonished her friend, her ruby eyes resting upon the cloaked form of the poker player. You've never seen anyone play poker, period. So the former student of the late Orochimaru raised an eyebrow and let go of her prey, shooting Yuhi Kurenai a rather defiant glare. Kurenai had to admit that since the death and probably vaporization of her previous teacher, Anko had changed almost completely from her sadistic and violent self. She was still sadistic mind, just in a far more cheerful and less self-damaging manner. I could still tell a good game from a bad one, at least when the occasional brave soul dared to ask her for a date. The snake user would only smilingly need the misfortunate bastard and his ancestral jewels rather than sent the offender into a mental ward. Did you locate the objective? From beneath the cloak came the cold voice of Naruto, muffled by the thick fabric. Naruto had no idea how the two women managed to convince him to enter the poker tournament in the first place, but once he had sat down in the game, he had no intention of losing. Of course, just because he had won an enormous amount of money, it did not distract him from his original goal. Now looked everywhere, can't find a thing. Anko shook her head, though she did appear just a tad sheepish. Naruto sighed as he ran a hand through his hair. Perhaps he should not have imposed such a task on the two women. This was not their mission after all. They had already endured more than enough during the invasion of Konoha. They deserved at least this. Even though Naruto himself was not yet aware of it, his cold demeanor was changing with each passing day. However, whether or not the restoration of his humanity would prove to be a good thing remains to be seen. I apologize for this, he said with a stiff bow of his head, a brief look of genuine contrite flashing across his face. Your assistance was appreciated. I shall leave you to enjoy the remainder of your vacation in peace. Before either of the kunoichis could speak, the swordsman turned on his heels and left. Well, that was unexpected, Anko commented as she watched Naruto's retreating figure thoughtfully. Naruto did have a point. Regardless, it wasn't their mission to locate the next Hokage to be. Anko and Kurenai, longtime best friends, had, after the nightmarish war that nearly uprooted Konoha from the ground, decided now was a good time to take a break from the merciless shinobi lifestyle with the village in fairly good conditions. They could actually afford a few weeks of vacation time. Naturally, when words got out about the maiden voyage of the deluxe ocean liner SS Oceania, Anko practically dragged the scarlet-eyed genjutsu mistress aboard. After all, as jonins, they almost never go any place fun, at least according to Anko, and it would be such a shame if they were to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Kurenai wasn't sure about that, though it did grant her a savage pleasure whenever she recalled the mental image of a devastated Kakashi upon being informed that the trip was invite only and the only 4 tickets were already given away, 2 for Naruto and Jiraiya, 2 for Anko and Kurenai, who had won them in the contest the Hokage had set up. She had been initially a little surprised to see Naruto about having not known about other 2 tickets and their recipients, although given his mission it did make sense that she would find the flaxen-haired youth here of all places. After all, what could possibly attract the legendary Tsunade more than one of the largest casinos in the world? Of course, now that she thought about it, Naruto really did not need to apologize for cutting into their vacation time. First of all, as fellow shinobis, well, Naruto wasn't exactly a ninja, but still of Konoha it was her duty to serve her village and to place the welfare of Konohagakure before her own. Besides, Jiraiya was right about one thing: if Tsunade was indeed aboard, then they wouldn't need to search very hard. Once you see people start to fly, chances are you've found her. Kurenai-chan. Anko was yanking her arms now with all the petulance of a little child. He's getting away. While before Kurenai could ask, she was pulled off her feet as Anko, still clinging onto her arm, dashed. After a certain departing blonde, it was difficult to tell exactly what her best friend thought about the child. As far as she could tell, Anko's feeling towards the savior of Konoha alternated between a sibling affection and actual infatuation. Partly perhaps that feeling arose out of the fact that not only was Naruto one of the most powerful entities in the world, period, but he was also the one who had avenged Anko, unintentional though it may be, by reducing Orochimaru to floating atomic particles. On the other hand, Kurenai licked her full ruby lips almost subconsciously. Though only 13, Naruto looks good, and besides there was only 5-6 years between them, not enough to be discouraging, certainly. Besides, perhaps the boy would even be interested in someone more mature. The thought was firmly and swiftly repressed as the so-called Ice Queen of Konoha fought hard to prevent a furious blush from surfacing. Damn it, she shouldn't be having such perverted thoughts. She's almost as bad as that damn Jiraiya. After 2 days in the older ninja's company, whatever respect Kurenai has had for the Sanins was lost completely. Still, Kurenai rolled her eyes as she managed to fall into step beside the violet-haired special Jonin. I can't believe you were in Naruto's fan club. You're just jealous because you didn't act fast enough to buy the last membership. Anko responded by sticking out her tongue. Shut up. Alright, may I have your attention please? A rather nondescript girl was banging on her podium with all the authority of an academy teacher in a room full of chatty children with all the success to silence. I demand silence. When it became apparent her congregation would not give her a moment of peace for her to deliver her painstakingly prepared speech, the girl narrowed her eyes dangerously and pulled out a megaphone. Shut the hell up, everyone quieted at once, including several kunoichis who had been glaring daggers at one another for the past few minutes. In fact, they were just short of pulling out their kunais. Ahem, thank you. The girl cleared her throat in a thoroughly exaggerated manner before speaking up again. As I was saying, welcoming to the first meeting of the Konoha division of Uzumaki Naruto Fan Club. A long and obscure title, but the original was much worse. There was some scattered applause at this, though most of its members were still eyeing each other with silent promises of bloodbath and torture unless the other party gives up on their precious Naruto. I see everyone has brought their required Naruto plushie, their Naruto water bottle. The girl continued to list off the various merchandises which had incorporated the image of a certain golden-haired child, ignoring everything else about the boy. He does make a very profitable franchise. The autobiography, a lone sealed blade supposedly penned by the manor child himself, remained atop the bestseller list for over 3 months with no sign of slipping, despite the acknowledgement that Uzumaki Naruto was not involved in any stage of the book's production. That did not stop it from selling millions of copies. However, meanwhile, Haku sat to the back of the room smirking rather sadistically at the squabbling girls. How very foolish of them. If they thought they could somehow gain even the attention of her Naruto-sama, they would have a better chance taming the raging fires of the sun itself. Ever since that thrice damnable tome came out, every Naruto fangirl had gone from nonsensical to pure delusional, filled with impossible ideas that they are the ones to fill the empty void in Naruto's life that only their gentle touch could soothe and reign in a tortured soul. How absolutely appallingly ignorant. Haku sighed and glanced around the room. At least the fact she was living with Naruto wasn't public knowledge, or there will be people out for her blood. Her gaze came momentarily into contact with a pair of startling white eyes, the eyes of a Hyuga Hanabi. Hyuga, to be exact. Haku smiled slightly at the girl, who politely smiled back, though there was something in her gaze that wasn't exactly friendly but not entirely hostile either. Hanabi was one of the few people the elder girl knew who had Naruto's good graces aside from herself, the small girl, and her sister had been the only ones who Naruto had specifically protected. For Naruto to single and designate someone in such a fashion would mean that Naruto holds them in a completely different regards than the rest of the people. It also means that they had more hope than anyone else to grow closer to Naruto, a friend, or even something more. Perhaps. Haku rubbed her chin in contemplation. It was time to have a talk with those two. Tsunade was not having the best of lucks. That wasn't unusual, of course, since she could not remember a day when her luck at gambling was anything but abysmal. It didn't help that she was a gambling addict. Certainly. Still, it was rather fortunate that she was a highly sought-after healer whose pay was more than enough to support both her and her student as well as her sinful urges. Another sigh escaped her lips as Sannin no Tsunade watched the dice land on a 3 wrong again, which in turn meant that yet another handful of raya just went up in smokes. Without a second thought, she reached for her pocket only to find it empty of coinage. Damn, the blonde woman swore loudly as she grudgingly relinquished her seat. Nope, luck not improving at all. Throwing one last longing glance at the gambling area, the slug summoner marched out of the casino and towards the cafe where hopefully she could fill her empty stomach. Please don't feel bad, Tsunade-sama. Swanna's young and raven-haired apprentice hurried to her side and as always offered her consolation. Taunton the pig honked its agreement, snuggled between Shizen's arms comfortably. God damn it all, Tsunade growled as she restrained herself from punching the side of the ship, an action that was sure to have exceedingly disastrous consequences. I swear, Shizen, they are cheating somehow. Before the younger medic Nin could reply, several extravagantly dressed passengers walked past them, speaking loudly to one another in excited voices. They seemed to be worked up over something, their faces flushed. Hurry, we might miss it. A man with a rather pasty complexion exclaimed loudly, his words laced with an exotic accent neither woman could quite place. I know 200 million Rias, a somewhat attractive woman though with entirely too much makeup, sighed wistfully. Imagine all the things we could buy. Tsunade's eyes lit up at the mention of the sum. Without a word, she grabbed her student's wrist and bounded off towards the casino. Once again, she had heard the casino would host an important event, but she would never have guessed they'd offer so immense a prize. It was true she wasn't qualified to participate, but watching was just as good. Who knows, she might even learn a thing or two from the players there. Like the rest of the audience, Tsunade applauded the winner. Unlike the crowd, she was able to detect other movements at the same time, such as the almost imperceptible nod the old man Katsura gave to a sharply dressed youth standing just outside of the ring of gambling addicts. The younger man returned the nod and made a silent gesture. Tsunade could feel the barely detectable chakra flowing from the hand seal a signal. She also noticed the thin, dangerous and thoroughly predatory-like smile the woman Midori gave the retreating Erasure. It was the kind of look a feline wore moments before it pounced. Tsunade narrowed her gaze as she noticed the thin reflective sheen on Midori's nails, a coat of deadly poison expertly applied. An assassin, if she had ever seen one, not a ninja perhaps, but it didn't make her any less dangerous. After all, your average shinobi would never suspect a seemingly normal civilian, a weakness that assassins tend to take advantage of. So at least two factions wanted this Erasure person dead, and judging by the look of things, each side were more than capable. Briefly, Tsunade considered whether or not to aid the winner, though her mind changed promptly when Erasure looked back over his shoulder. It was at that moment when Tsunade realized just how dangerous the prey was. In the brief moment that their eyes made contact, Tsunade felt herself caught in the vortex of an inexorable maelstrom staring into the very depth of oblivion itself. But as a seasoned ninja, the feeling was quickly suppressed, though the memory of it still made her shiver. Whatever that was, it wasn't human, not entirely imagined. Seeing you here, Midori purred as she leaned against the wall of the private cabin, eyeing Erasure with barely concealed greed. She wore a low-cut evening gown that revealed ample cleavage, though Erasure seemed to ignore them entirely as he stared into the woman's eyes. Not a very smart move alone with all that cash. Her whispers trailed off as a kunai was pressed against the side of her neck, the cold steel biting into her flesh. The same could be said of you, Midori-san. The voice of young man intoned. He was about 25 or so, handsome and professional looking, with his raven hair short and slicked back. The man was dressed in the traditional garbs of a shinobi, though without a forehead protector to indicate his allegiance. Midori's pupil shrunk in shock as she felt the metallic weapon against her skin, though her calm and seductive demeanor returned in a hurry. Now aren't we a little hasty?" she asked with a perfectly innocent expression, her nails tracing a pattern on the interloper's cloth. The man's eyes widened in shock as the realization struck poison observant. "Aren't we?" Midori grinned victoriously, knowing that she had the upper hand. The shinobi frowned for a moment before relenting. "Perhaps a compromise could be worked out," agreed Midori smirked again. "We'll split the sum between us. What do you say?" The young man frowned for a moment and then nodded his agreement. Ishikawa-sama wasn't so much interested in the money as he was in getting even for some nameless brat that had showed him up. He could care less about the actual money, and with Chin and Midori present, his mission was many folds more difficult if the woman chose to oppose him. "I have no contention to this resolution," he offered. Right then Midori licked her lips in a rather suggestive manner and turned towards Erasure, leaning forward just so she allowed him a gorgeous glance at what she had to offer. "As I was saying, it was quite a mistake." Naruto, beneath the cowl, allowed himself a cold smile as he channeled mana to his fingertips, the energy around him pulsating unnaturally. "Agreed, Chin and San, it was a mistake." Midori stepped back in alarm. There was no panic in her praised voice. In fact, if anything, the man sounded smug. "It was a mistake that you will not live to regret," Naruto muttered as Muramasa manifested into his hand. Before either of his would-be assassins could react, Naruto brought his sword upward in a single casual uppercut. The door to the room exploded outward, followed by an explosion of debris and splinters. The room was demolished with a singular stroke of the blade. Naruto's voice broke through the pandemonium as he shot towards Midori, his sword poised for a finishing blow. Before the katana could bury itself, however, an earth-splitting roar reached their ears, followed by a violent quake of the ship. Naruto's eyes, for the first time since he had boarded the ship, expressed measured surprise. This feeling, he thought as he lowered his weapon inches from taking the female assassin's life. "I should have known there would be more of them." "What the hell is that?" Tsunade questioned, momentarily letting go of Jiraiya's collar. The toad pervert fell to the floor, gasping for the precious air. "Damn, Tsunade haven't gotten any weaker since he last parted from her shit." Jiraiya narrowed his eyes as he messaged his sore throat, where Tsunade's grip had left a rather prominent mark. "Of all the time for those things to show up, if they are as strong as they were the last time, this ship doesn't stand a ghost of a chance. Let's just hope Naruto could take care of them before they can do any real damage." "That, my dear," Jiraiya spoke slowly as he performed a series of seals, "is what we called you back to the village for." Even as the words left his mouth, he felt a breeze swept past his face, and seconds later Naruto emerged in a whirlwind of radiant chakra. The disguise gone, the boy had once more donned his infamous black cloak and assumed his role as the Angel of Death. His eyes, which had shown a brilliant blue moment earlier, now took on a hue of indigo green as the Mako within his bloodstream surged in excitement. However, he looked nothing like his child self, but a young man of 20 or so with dark brown hair that grew past his shoulders, and a face that, while not particularly handsome, was not exactly ugly either. "Be careful, Jiraiya-san," he warned as the roaring voice of the creature neared the vessel. "This adversary should not be taken lightly, especially given our condition." Jiraiya, ignoring the questioning look Tsunade threw him, nodded without a word. Naruto turned and left, searching out the two other Konoha nins who had also took part on this trip. They were the only ones who had any experience dealing with those creatures, the only ones he could trust not to go into a panic once the feces hit the ceiling. The last thing he needed was for these civilians to create needless chaos and distraction on deck. Tsunade, watching the young man's retreating figure, faced her old teammate questioningly. "Whoever that was," he spoke to Jiraiya in almost a commanding tone. Even more surprising, the pervert actually obeyed the instructions, something she'd never thought he would do aside from those given by their sensei. What was going on here? Who was that? The way she had stated the question allowed for no maneuver room, and knowing the princess, Jiraiya was sure that if he answered with anything less than the truth, he would be on the receiving end of a world of hurt. "Damn, her clairvoyance, that, my dear, was Uzumaki." Naruto, at the stunned look on Tsunade's face, the white-haired shinobi legend, couldn't help but let out a chuckle. "I see you've heard of him then." They came from the distance, their shadows blotting out the sun itself, an angry swarm of darkness that seemed to stretch from one end of the airy expanse to the other, covering the horizon with their malevolence. At first, the overhead speakers had warned the passengers to head inside in anticipation for a thunderstorm, though very soon the mistake became apparent. By the time Naruto located the two wandering women, it was clear to almost everyone that whatever the black clouds are, they were anything but natural. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he took note of the creatures that composed the advancing mass. It would appear his work was not yet finished here. Slowly his thin lips curled upward in the facsimile of a smile. With a wave of his hand, an enormous white wing unfurled from his left shoulder, it was only right for a monster to end the lives of his brethren. Raising his hands skyward, Naruto summoned forth the dormant powers of his materia. The green master magic materia glowed brilliantly near his heart as it answered the call of its master. Tendrils of mana shot towards the darkening heavens and parted the gathering clouds, revealing what appeared to be numerous twinkling stars that grew larger and larger with each passing second. Comets like death riding its pale horse, shooting stars descended from the height of heavens and launched their burning masses towards the lines of monsters, leaving behind fading streaks of blinding light. Explosions raked across the black armies, showering the sea below with a rain of burning flesh and roaring inferno. Before the monsters could collect themselves, Naruto slashed the air before him with blurring speed, sending several beams of energy towards the assembled adversaries. Originally Sephiroth's technique, the attack enabled even a sword master to perform long-distance strikes by focusing mana into one's blade and releasing it in a compressed and devastating form. Though unnamed by the silver-haired swordsman, Naruto had decided to call the attack Sword Aura for organization's sake. The level of damage one could do depended on the amount of mana available. An average soldier's aura was enough to slice through concrete without much effort, though with someone like Naruto, the scale of destruction is unimaginable. By this time the shinobis who had come aboard had assembled on deck, ready to defend the ship at any cost. Most of them had been hired for just that purpose. At any rate, though, now they found themselves completely and utterly free of that duty, instead acting as spectators to possible the most powerful entity to ever grace the surface of their planet, aside from possibly the nine-tailed demon fox. By the gods, one of the shinobi whispered, "Who is he? Hell, what is he?" Even as Naruto demolished the forces of the monstrosities, the fiends themselves began to launch counterattacks, though seemingly more out of fear and confusion than in any organized efforts. A grim and superior smirk appeared on the young man's face as he snapped his fingers. Barrier, a wall of crystal-like structure, appeared at his pronouncement, reflecting the destructive beams that had reached the ship back at their originators. Several shrieks of anguish were heard, though it was soon drowned out by the earth-shaking detonations that resulted. At the same time, Naruto once more trained his blade upon his enemies. Judging by the look of things, it would appear that Jiraiya had found their target. There was no more reason to linger. Then slowly, cautiously, the boy closed his eyes and welcomed the blessed oblivion, allowing the darkness in his heart to take command. His eyes opened, gradually glowing a malicious evil that seemed unnatural even for him. Slowly, the once snow-white features on his back began to change, giving way to a black, as deep and smooth as ink. A feral smile appeared upon the boy's aged face as he glanced up at his foes. No sacrifices. Blizzaga. The clouds began to swirl around the host of fiends, gathering in momentum and intensity. Gradually, however, the black thunderheads vanished little by little, leaving a tornado of ice and snow. The frosty elements howled as the storm grew into a crescendo of sounds and fury, consuming all that was caught in the vortex. A maelstrom of freezing powers poured out in every direction, seeking to cover the very earth and still life itself. The blizzard grew stronger and stronger, filling the air with sharp crystals and snow flakes. The air grew cold, incredibly so. Frost began to appear on the windowsills of the ship, and liquids turned to solid water froze as the wave of wintry passed the ship, caught in the grasp of a glacial entity. Then all at once the coldness paused as the black-clad figure pointed his left palm towards the still rotating storm. Then, as his hand formed into a fist, the storm vanished without a trace, leaving only the once seemingly menacing abominations now trapped in prisons of crystal. Another quick gesture and the icy confines shattered alone with their contents. The gathered darkness was no more consumed by far greater shadows. It was on this day the Fire Lord of Konoha would be deified, and the legend of Uzumaki Naruto spread even further. Kisame Hashigaki swore as he watched the storm die down as one of the 7 swordsmen of Mist. Well, former swordsman. At any rate, he was a fair judge of strength. Perhaps he wasn't as perceptive as Itachi on certain matters, but his instinct was usually fairly accurate on the level of danger. His foes presented a gift that aided him through many seemingly impossible battles, though this one. At the thought, Kisame tightened his grip upon his massive cleaver, though by now he wasn't even sure if he had the courage to draw the blade when faced against the master of that supernatural force. The shark man was not a coward by any means of the word, but he wasn't exactly stupid either. He was overall fairly confident about his abilities, trusting his blade and jutsus to match even Kage-leveled foes. Of course, there was a rather notable difference between a Kage and a god. The one who had just performed that feat seemed too much like the latter for Kisame's own comfort. If it had been him that was caught in that storm, or even the early attacks the man had conjured forth, Kisame wasn't so pleased with his own chance of survival. Indeed, even if he did somehow live through the ordeal, there is a 99% chance he would be disabled on a level that allowed even a child to end his life. This is grim news. Itachi hesitated a moment before speaking, regaining his composure. I've sent words to the organization. Well, what did Pain-sama say? Kisame demanded. He hoped the gods Pain would not be so mad as to send the two of them to confront this monster. He'd much rather take on the Nine-Tail when it was still roaming freely. We are to return to the headquarters at once, Itachi answered at last. Uzumaki Naruto is now considered a SSS security threat, and the confrontation with whom must be avoided at any cost necessary. Was it his imagination, or did Itachi seem almost relieved? Kisame shook his head. It wasn't just Itachi. By the looks of it, even Pain of all people are disturbed by this Naruto's presence. SSS level threat, unbelievable. That would mean whoever Uzumaki Naruto is, he has the power to completely destabilized the structure of Akatsuki to the point of annihilation. Although considering what he had just bore witness to, Kisame wasn't so sure this was exaggeration. Perhaps if it did come down to a full-on fight, the Akatsuki might be able to neutralize the threat, but even if they did, it would be a Pyrrhic victory at best. Hell, would there even be any member left to celebrate it? Thank the heavens, Uzumaki Naruto wasn't a Jinchuriki. Sometimes the irony is blistering, sir. The voice of the messenger pierced the darkness, calm and reserved. We have located the whereabouts of Project Zero. I see. The darkness stirred in excitement at the news, allowing a cold, bone-chilling chuckle to issue forth from his throat. Slowly the shadows parted to allow entrance to several figures clad in ancient ceremonial robes of an age long past, their faces covered with opaque veils. The leader of the group, identified by the single star-like symbol sewed on his garments, waved a hand and dismissed the shinobi. Excellent work, your service shall be well rewarded. As the servant vanished from sight, the leader turned to his fellow members. Though his face remained obstruct, still it was evident he was smiling as he addressed the assembly. It would seem that our efforts could at last come to fruition after some unforeseen delays. Go now and spread the word. The retrieval of the blueprint from the experiment must be retrieved at any cost, alive or dead. I want that creature brought to me. With a collected high, the mysterious entities disappeared one by one as tendrils of darkness took them. For a long moment silence reigned in the grove, though at length the leader spoke up again, addressing only the passing winds. It is such a shame that you aren't around to witness the destruction of all that you hold precious. He spat out, every word dripping with venom. Namikaze Minato, traitor of the Kazama clan,